What's up, guys? This is D, and you're watching the Rear Naked Podcast. Some of the things we're going to be talking about today on the show are the upcoming cards of the rest of February and March, including UFC 235 with John Jones and Anthony Smith, and then this weekend's Fight Night card with Ngannou versus Velasquez. Then we're going to be talking about some of the latest trending UFC news, taking a couple of fan questions, and then at the end of the show, we'll do the fight picks. So jumping right into it, this weekend, Phoenix, Talking Stick Resort, UFC Fight Night, Francis Ngannou versus Cain Velasquez. Cain Velasquez first returned back in the UFC octagon since, I believe it was June or July of 2016 when he beat Travis Brown, and before that was coming off a loss to Verdum. We've seen some of the training coming on with Velasquez, with Javier Mendez, and he's been training with the champ Daniel Cormier lately too. So, not only has his striking, ground game, and wrestling always been one of the best, and definitely one of the best heavyweights of all time in the UFC, but really looking to see how Cain's improved from the break, and I don't really expect to see a lot of ring rust with a veteran like Cain Velasquez, considering he's training with Daniel Cormier and he's got a coach like Javier Mendez. I'm really looking forward to seeing how he's improved and come back. I expect his ground game to be, even better than it's always been before. And if you ask me, I think Velasquez is probably going to make pretty easy work of Ngannou if he can avoid those power punches. As you know, it only takes a couple of punches from Ngannou to put anybody to sleep. So interesting to see from both sides of the table what's been going on with Cain Velasquez and how he's going to look after 3 years being out of the octagon. And it'll be interesting to see whether or not Ngannou's improved his ground game at all, any of his wrestling defense, and whether or not his conditioning is gonna look to be helping him improve his game against somebody as dangerous as Cain Velasquez. For the co-main, Paul Felder taking on James Vick. And, Felder's an amazing fighter, man. We saw Felder, hold his own against a bigger guy like Mike Perry in his last bout. And even though he took a loss on that fight, in my opinion, I think that being the smaller guy and with Perry being such a dangerous, power puncher, Felder's had no problem holding his own with that. And he took all of, I feel like he took all of Mike Perry's, best hits, hardest punches, and Perry still couldn't put him to sleep. So at the end of the day, I think considering the way that Vic got embarrassed by Gaethje in his last time out, I don't see anything being too difficult for Felder to overcome in this fight, as long as he keeps his head and fights the way he's been fighting in the last few fights from. Other than that, next thing we're going to be talking about is the lightweight title and whether or not Dana is going to be creating an interim fight between Tony Ferguson and Dustin Poirier. Now, with Dustin Poirier sitting at number 3, everyone saying that that's the fight to make. Dana said that that's the fight to make if they do end up stripping Khabib of his title. But me being the Diaz brother fan that I am, the fact that Poirier pulled out of his last fight with Diaz due to a hip injury, and then less than 30 days after that was talking about wanting to step in the cage and fight for a number 1 contender spot or a title fight, or calling out people like Conor. That's the name of the game nowadays. Everybody wants to fight Conor McGregor, regardless of whether or not he's worth the fight or not, just because he brings a paycheck. Whether or not those guys are fight or not, we'll see, because as you know, Dana says a lot of stuff that doesn't end up happening a lot of times. But if it does end up happening, I would say that Tony definitely has no problem putting Poirier away within a round or 2 in that one. One of the things in discussion right now, which is really interesting to me, I'd love to see happen, is a potential card everyone's talking about with both of the Diaz brothers, which would be ridiculously cool. Recently in the news, Anderson Silva's been talking about how he and Nick Diaz are in discussions to possibly do a fight. So whether or not that happened in Brazil or Vegas, I would love to see those guys fight again. And then if it did, it looked like Conor was jumping on social media and said, hey, if that's happening, let's book it. And me and Nate do the main event. So I would love to see Nate Diaz get his trilogy fight against Conor, kind of shut everybody up once and for all. And then, you know, obviously it's always cool to see Nick Diaz fight. It's always an entertaining fight, both of the Diaz brothers, and to have them on the same card would just be ridiculous. So while all four of the big names on that potential card, if that were to happen, are all coming off of L's and none of them have a win lately, I think that it's in the discussion for maybe possibly one of the biggest pay-per-views ever. And you know, I guess we'll just have to see what happens with that one. Next up, you got UFC 235. A lot of good fights on this card. You got John Jones versus Anthony Smith for the light heavyweight title. You got Tyron Woodley defending his title again against Conor Usman. You got Ben Askren's UFC debut against Robbie Lawler. And then you got Garbrandt's return. So, you know, that's going to be a really packed card. I would expect the pay-per-view numbers in that one to be pretty high as well, because there's some big names on that fight, and a lot of people are really interested in seeing what's going to happen with Askren too. So got that going on. One of the other things we wanted to talk about is the men's flyweight division. Now, Dana really hasn't been answering a lot of questions still about that, even though Cejudo got his win over TJ, with it being such a controversial stoppage. I would expect those guys to book that back. We don't know whether it's going to be at 125 or 135. If you ask me, I think they're probably going to have Tony or have Cejudo move up to 35. And then I don't see Dillashaw being able to beat Cejudo. I think Cejudo's still going to put Dillashaw away in that. And if he does, you know, then that's going to raise a lot of questions. What's going to be going on next in that division? Is that going to create a trilogy fight between Dillashaw and Garbrandt? If Garbrandt's able to win his fight on 235, I would love to see those guys fight again, because this last fight with a short stoppage with Dillashaw, which is clear, and then me being a fan of TJ, or being a fan of Garbrandt's a while back, I was actually going for Garbrandt in the TJ fight, and I felt like that was an early stoppage as well. So with both of them kind of coming off of controversial stoppages, I would love to see TJ and Garbrandt booked for a third time if Cejudo ends up taking the belt at the 135 division. So a lot of good trilogies and a lot of good chances for people to kind of squash beefs coming up here lately. If you can get Conor and Diaz 3, if you can get TJ and Garbrandt in there again, I'd love to see that trilogy finished up. And then, you know, a lot of other exciting things coming up in the division. I'm excited to see Till and Masvidal fight in England, so that's going to be cool. So next up on the show, we're going to answer a couple of fan questions. Our first question comes from Rob in Inglewood, Colorado. He wanted to know what my top 5 favorite fighters of all time in the UFC. It's a great question, Rob. Number 1, I guess I'm going to probably go with Nate Diaz. I'm a huge fan of both Diaz brothers for a couple of reasons. Number 1, just the way that they carry themselves in the UFC. Nate's always been one of my favorite fighters since breaking out in the Ultimate Fighter. Kind of dude that wasn't even thinking about, you know, getting into the UFC until his brother pushed him into it. Goes in there, cleans out the whole house, wins the show, and you know, comes in while he hasn't had the greatest record in the UFC because of a lot of bullshit decision losses, stuff like that. Nate's always gonna be one of my favorite fighters. Number 2. Probably going to be John Jones, and for a lot of the same reasons. Just got that attitude that's always resonated with me. Dude can be out partying, doing his thing, living his life, and not training 100% of the time, especially with John Jones. You know, he's been known in the past to not even train for fights and come in and still knock somebody the fuck out. So that's a big reason why John Jones and both the Diaz brothers are my top 2 favorites. Number 3, on the opposite side of the spectrum, I'm going to go with Rose Namajunas. Rose is one of my favorite fighters, man, and just a picture-perfect, ideal image of a true martial artist, man. This girl comes in composed, calm, collected, and does her homework. She trains hard, she works hard, and she's always respectful to her opponents. She's exactly what you want to see in a pure martial artist, and somebody who can come up and be a role model for not only all the young girls coming up, but for anybody in general that that just likes to see people like Rose, man. She's got a great energy, and she comes in. She's always nice to people. She's cool, collected, takes pictures with fans, and does this and that. And then you know, when the doors lock in the cage and she's got the gloves on, watch out, because she'll fuck you up. She will fuck you up. And number 3, I'm gonna go with Michelle Waterson. Kind of the same thing. Awesome energy with Michelle Waterson. Not only is she an amazing karate striker and can knock anybody the fuck out in the women's division, but she's just got an unmatched energy, if you ask me. She walk into a room for her weigh-ins and stuff like that, and she's always goofing around or dancing or doing something funny, and she can put a smile on even the rudest motherfucker's face. So Michelle Waterson, probably my number 4 fighter. My next favorite fighter at number 5, she's not actually in the UFC yet, but it's Mallory Martin. She fights for Invicta, and she's fighting out of Brighton, Colorado. Out here, she trains with Ngannou, BJJ, and Tiger Muay Thai. She actually won Most Improved Fighter 2018 over fighters like Tisha Torres who are in the UFC. So I think that speaks volumes to you know, where she's at with her game and her improvement overall. With a pro record of 4-2 and her last 3 fights undefeated, she's been one of the most exciting fighters for me to watch personally. Not only because it's cool that she's fighting here locally and she's, you know, the local girl, but she's just got that badass attitude that I love. The same reason that I love the Diaz brothers and John Jones, man. While she's on top of some poor girl beating the shit out of her, she's screaming, "No one can save you." And I mean, come on, what else do you want to see in a fight, man? That's what you want to see. So yeah, Nate Diaz, John Jones, Rose Namajunas, Michelle Waterson, and then Mallory Martin for my number 5 pick. And second question comes from Dave in Denver. He want to know what fights I'd like to see happen in 2019. I guess the first fight that I'd really like to see is Nate and Conor trilogy, and it sounds like we might be able to see that sometime before this summer, around summertime, according to what's going on, what's on social media with Conor and Nate. Second fight I think we're going to see is going to be Tony and Khabib after the whole interim thing sorted out. I would think that if they set up an interim title, like I said, between Ferguson and Poirier, that Poirier just doesn't have what it takes to beat somebody like Ferguson, and I would see Ferguson probably taking over interim title at that point, and then they would bring in Khabib to fight Tony for that. So that's what I see for probably my second fight for 2019. For my third fight, I think that I'd like to see Johnny Walker fight some more this year, and I think we will, because typically when you see fighters coming in able to end and fight in the fashion that he's been able to lately, they're not taking any damage. Their accuracy rating's ridiculous. I think Johnny Walker's sitting at a 91 or 93% striking accuracy right now, because he's ending fights in 15 seconds flat. So Johnny Walker is somebody that I think definitely underrated right now, and a lot of people are sleeping on. He could realistically be 2 to 3 fights away from a contender spot for the light heavyweight title by the end of this year. So that's some fight that we might see. It'd be really fucking cool to see Johnny Walker fighting John Jones by the end of 2019. So that's something to watch out for. Third question comes from Lisa in Winchester, Virginia. She want to know what celebrity fight I would like to see the most. Lisa, that's an awesome question. I could sit around and talk about crazy hypothetical celebrity fights for hours. I think the number one celebrity fight that I'd really still like to see is Joe Rogan versus Wesley Snipes. There was some talk years back when Snipes was in some legal trouble, some tax trouble, that he was trying to put a fight together with Joe Rogan. I would love to see Joe Rogan jump in the cage and smash Wesley Snipes. As you know, Joe Rogan's got some of the most powerful kicks in the game, and we haven't really got to see Joe Rogan do anything for years. The guy's kickboxing record is fucking amazing. You watch him fight, he was a dangerous individual. He trains a lot of people like GSP. He's taught a lot of people a lot of dangerous kicks, which he's very, very proficient with. So yeah, I would love to see Joe Rogan beat the fuck out of Wesley Snipes. So that's it for the fan questions. If you guys have fan questions, remember you can submit them via email at rearnakedpodcast@gmail.com. You can send them to Facebook Messenger at the Rear Naked Podcast, or you can leave them in the comment section of any of our videos, and we'll pick them as the weeks come along. With that being said, next thing up is going to be the fight picks. So for the early prelims, first fight we got up is Alexandra Albu versus Emily Whitmire, the women's strawweight bout. We're going to go ahead and go with Alexandra Albu for that one. Next up in the men's bantamweight, we got Renan Barajo and Luke Sanders. We're going to pick Barajo for that one. Then we've got women's strawweight bout again with Jessica Penne versus Jody Escobar. We're going to pick Jody on that one. And then heading into the prelims, first fight on that card, we've got Scott Holtzman versus Nick Lentz. We're going to go with Holtzman on that one. We got Ashley Evans-Smith taking on Andrea Lee in the women's flyweight division. We're going to go with Lee on that one. We just think that Lee's probably going to be too much pressure for her and dominate her. Then we got Benito Lopez taking on Manny Bermudez in the men's bantamweight division. We're going to go with Bermudez on that one. Jimmy Rivera taking on Aljamain Sterling in the men's bantamweight. We got Sterling on that one. Sterling's been showing some pretty impressive work lately, and I think I expect Sterling to get it done against Rivera. We got Andre Feely coming up in the men's flyweight against Miles Jury in the first fight on the main card. We're going to pick Andre Touchy-Feely on that one. Then we go into the welterweight division. Vincent Luque and Brian Barberina. I think we're going to go with Luque on that one. Then we got into the flyweight bout. This is Kron Gracie's UFC debut against Alex Caceres. I expect Kron to come away with the win on this one, obviously by submission, but everybody's pretty excited to see his striking and see where it's at. So that'll be the fight to look to. Then we got Courtney Casey taking on Cynthia Calvillo in the strawweight division. We're going to go with Courtney Casey on that one. Then James Vick taking on Paul Felder in the men's lightweight division for the co-main event. I'm going to go with my man Paul Felder on this one. And that's because of his performance coming off, even though he's coming off of a loss with Mike Perry. If you ask me, he held his own with Mike Perry, from Perry being the bigger dude with the power punches. And Felder took all of his best, and he still couldn't knock him out. And Felder touched him quite a bit in that fight as well. So other than the wrestling, I think he held his own with Mike Perry, and I think you run that back, he has a good chance of actually beating Perry. But due to the fact that Vic got so embarrassed in his last fight with Gaethje, I don't expect Vic to have what it takes to stand and strike with Felder. So I'm going to go with my man Paul Felder on the co-main. And then for the big main event, Cain Velasquez in his return against the monster Francis Ngannou. We're going to go with Cain, obviously, on this one. Although Ngannou does have that ability to bring it to a knockout at any moment in time, I don't see it happening against somebody like Cain Velasquez. Even though Velasquez has been out of the game for a little while, everybody talks about ring rust. He's such a seasoned veteran and one of the best heavyweights of all time. I don't see Velasquez having any ring rust when he's training with Javier Mendez and Daniel Cormier right now. So I expect his, if not his striking to overwhelm Ngannou, definitely his ground and pound and his wrestling. So we're going to go with Velasquez for the main card. And that's it for the fight picks, guys. Remember, put your picks in, submit them via email to rearnakedpodcast@gmail.com. You can send them to the Facebook Messenger at the Rear Naked Podcast, or you can just leave them in the comment section down below. And if you pick a perfect card, 100%, the winner each week will get a free Rear Naked Podcast t-shirt. All right, guys, so that's pretty much it for the show today. I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Remember to please hit the like button down below. Subscribe to the channel to keep up with all the news and the latest episodes of the show. And please, please, please share this content with any of your friends that are into combat sports, specifically UFC events. We're going to be coming with a lot of stuff this year. We're going to have a lot of fighters interviewed on the show. A lot of very cool content coming up. So, like I said, thanks for subscribing. Check out the Rear Naked Podcast. Share it with your friends. We'll see you guys next week. Thanks.
Peace.